ELT Terms and Concepts Part 2. In this episode, we shall learn some of the terms associating with assessment, testing, evaluation, and Bloom's taxonomy. If you take assessment and testing, the difference between these two terms is rather thin. Often, these two terms are used interchangeably to refer to the collection of data as well as awarding of marks to learner performance. However, testing is used just to refer to evaluation involving test, whereas assessment encompasses not only test but also other means of assessment such as observation, portfolios, case studies, interviews, etc. Besides, in an educational setting, assessment, evaluation, testing are all used to measure how much of assigned materials students are mastering, how well students are learning these materials, and how well students are meeting the stated goals and objectives. Testing, in other words, is used to examine someone's knowledge of something to determine what he or she knows or has learnt. Testing measures the level of skill, knowledge that has been reached. Evaluation, on the other hand, is the process of making judgments based on criteria and evidence. Assessment is the process of documenting knowledge, skills, attitude, and beliefs, usually in measurable terms. The goal of assessment is to make improvements as opposed to simply being judged. In an educational context, assessment is the process of describing, collecting, recording, scoring, and interpreting information about learning. For example, some people argue that you get a fairer and more accurate picture of learner performance using the wide range of techniques available through assessment. They think that the results obtained from tests provide a less comprehensive picture of what the learner can do. Assessment for learning is often contrasted with assessment of learning. If you take assessment of learning as something that we refer to as semester examination, assessment for learning should be taken as an example of the test that we conduct to see the improvement of the learners. Assessment for learning aims at promoting and encouraging learning rather than just evaluation or assessing it, or seeing assessment as a means of identifying what the learning needs to be focused on next. It often takes the form of formative assessment during lessons and encourages learner autonomy as a way of achieving its purposes. Formative assessment, on the other hand, refers to making judgments about the success of learning. The purpose of formative assessment is to help the teacher or even learners decide what should be taught next, possibly how, based on analysis of the needs of the learners as revealed by the assessment. Formative assessment is often informal, with the teacher listening to or looking at learners' performance and possibly taking notes. Learners may be unaware that it is taking place. For example, formative assessment really helps people see how well their learners and individual learners in particular have learned something. Now, summative assessment is something that we also refer to as semester examination. Summative assessment takes place at the end of a course of learning to see how much each learner has learnt from the syllabus covered. For example, it is quite difficult to design summative tests that are meant to reflect what you have taught from the syllabus. But some things are really quite difficult to test. Therefore, the test doesn't always reflect the syllabus well enough. Portfolio assessment involves the assessment of portfolio of work submitted by a learner. The portfolio may contain compulsory components or be decided on by the learner. The components may include both oral and written work, as well as reflections on that work. Assessment criteria are usually used to guide the making of portfolios so as to stop the marking becomes too subjective. Washback. This is the term in the US context more commonly referred to as backwash. It is used to refer to testing and assessment to describe the effect of the classroom of test the learners will take. Washback may affect, for example, the syllabus, methodology, interaction patterns, attitudes to learning, etc. And it can be both positive and negative. Feedback. The term feedback has two meanings in ELT. It refers to the response that we as listeners give to a speaker. For example, eye contact, exclamations, interruptions in order to encourage or discourage them from continuing. Feedback also refers to the comments a teacher or other students make in the class on a learner's performance. This feedback can be both positive and negative. Next, we move on to Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is a very important concept that we all have to learn as teachers and learners. This is a classification of affective and cognitive skills that is used to provide learning objectives. It was published by a committee of educators in the USA in 1956. Benjamin Bloom was the chair of the committee. The taxonomy of cognitive skills in particular has been very influential in curriculum and examination design. It was further revised in 2000. For example, Bloom's taxonomy identifies cognitive skills and divides them into two categories as follows: higher order thinking skills, namely creating, evaluating, analyzing; lower order thinking skills, namely applying, understanding, and remembering. Now, if you take higher order thinking skills, they are further divided into some of the sub skills that we referred to as analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Higher order thinking skills involve greater manipulation of information than lower order thinking skills. For example, teachers are sometimes criticized for asking too many lower order thinking skills questions in their classes and not asking enough higher order thinking skill questions which really challenge the learners to think about the information. Lower order thinking skills definitely are important, but we teachers need to move on to higher order thinking skills. For example, tell me what you did during the holidays or describe your family. These are some of the typical ELT questions that are branded as lower order thinking skill questions. An example of higher order thinking skills questions might be: what do you think of that particular film? Or compare your town with Moscow. You don't have to think so hard for answering these questions, but then you need to think and create and synthesize your knowledge. Finally, CEFR is the term that we need to learn. It refers to Common European Frame of Reference. It was compiled by the Council of Europe and contains a series of descriptors of learners' language performance at 6 different levels of proficiency, starting with A1 to C2 across the different language skills. The descriptors are expressed as can-do statements. They can be used to set goals for learning or teaching and also to assess students' proficiency. For example, a lot of course books these days use the CEFR to define the level of learners they are intended for and to design the syllabus around. These are the terms that we discussed today, and you will learn them in a better manner if you refer to some of the books available in the internet.